Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Um, the guest of honor, former Foreign Minister Inam-ul-Haque Sahib, Executive Director of CISS, Ambassador editor of the book, former teacher and former boss, Dr. Naim Sahib, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I must begin by saying that despite my interest and my avid follow-up of these kind of subjects for a significant length of time, this is the first time I'm formally reviewing the book and formally offering my comments as a reviewer. So I found this experience very interesting, and I think what I want to do is, since I'm not a professional reviewer, to provide you my comments the way I went through the book and I saw them. And I must also appreciate that the process in which this rather new think tank, CISS, has undertaken the book-length studies, a series of security studies, etc., etc. But before I say anything on the substance and the quality of this, I think one more aspect that needs a mention is the discipline with which CISS is undertaking studies. Some of us might recall that exactly 1 year ago, on this date, 30th of March, at this time, about 4 o'clock or thereafter, and at this particular venue, in this room, there was a book launch from CISS, Brigadier Saleh, who was the author, now he's the editor. So it took precisely 1 year to come up with the next one. And now I'm noting the date, and I will be here as member of Islamabad Club on 30th of March next year to see if something else is going to come. I hope that some of us have had an opportunity to look at the book. And I hope that those who have would tend to agree with me that the intricate detail of publishing, the way it has, the effort that has gone into this. It is very rare to find the finest quality paper, a very appropriate font, which is not probably common, not like the infamous font that didn't exist earlier, but a better one. Pretty quality by itself, a hardbound cover, which also has the same as the paper cover that you have. And of course, very contemporary substance, all in one place. And to top it all, this book is extremely low priced in my view, perhaps intentionally, perhaps to encourage students to read it, have personal copies, etc., etc. I should add, since I happen to know this aspect, is that one of the possible reasons is the publishing house owned by University of Lahore, and it's very dynamic young German. It might be his business strategy, or might be his approach towards anything national and exploring it and expanding it along that way. But what I see is that this is the first book that this university has published, and one hopes that this trend will continue and sustain this interest, etc. Okay, on the book itself, first some general comments. Like Mr. Tariq Usman has spoken and told us about it. All the authors of these various chapters are very well known in this specialized field. The experience is very diverse. We have Ambassador Ali Sawan Naqvi with his ripe in his years, his tremendous amount of experience. We have significant degree of years of experience. If you add all this together, it should reach a century of experience. But I especially note with a lot of pleasure the contribution by Simon Sana, whom when I met first was a brilliant student working on defense and diplomatic studies at that time. And now she's an expert in her own right. Where are you? Please stand up and smile at everyone. Thank you very much. I see her now 11 feet tall in such a short time. That's brilliant work that you've done. And all other authors are so well-known experts that they do not need introductions. They are of international acclaim in their own right, and they're known for their teaching and speaking pursuits, both in domestic and international forums. I took some time to think of, I must provide some criticism and one must find something there. It was hard, but I found something, so I will tell you about that also. And my first observation on this is that the sequencing of the chapters could have been different. That's perhaps, it's a matter of choice. But just to give an example, the book begins with a discussion on the nuclear fuel cycle, which is, in my view, quite readable despite being pretty technical. However, it does bring in an effort. And in my view, perhaps some discussion on the nuclear non-professional regime might have set the pace and then this technical side. So sequencing might have been useful. But the editing appears to be very, very meticulous. Although there are some minor issues here and there, perhaps on page 160 or some endnotes that I will need counter check, and I'm sure they will be taken care of subsequently. Some overlapping information that comes in chapters appears to me a bit inevitable. And I note that at least two, if not more, authors have very cautiously mentioned that the rest of this discussion will be in other chapters. So they've cautiously tried to stay away from that. So that's inevitable. Sometimes it also helps to sustain that point as you move from one chapter to another, and hence my broader view on the sequencing. In a nutshell, I think the biggest contribution that this book is making is to provide very wholesome information in one book cover. In several subjects that it deals with, important contribution each chapter is making. Sometimes they start or they continue by stating the obvious. And in my view, stating the obvious actually sets the pace and does help. When I look at that part of the book, I am happy to say that this should be an essential reading in the universities, because it does provide the baseline information. Look at, for example, the chapter on IAEA that also tells you about the structure, about how it works, about the various aspects of it, and it then goes on to comment about what is the Pakistani perspective, what is the interaction that this country has with the IAEA, and so on and so forth. So it kind of makes you relate with that. So, but one observation that I found, and I thought, had that been the case, it would have been relatively easier for a person like me who likes to actually look at the footnotes or the endnotes and see what is the linkage. And in my view, it's more easily readable if the resort is to footnotes rather than endnotes, because it's right there. So that would have been helpful too. If you include the introduction and conclusion as chapters, there are a total of 11 chapters. But 5 are authored by the editor himself. That seems a bit too much. I should say that, and I have poetic classes by being a student, so let me say that. But that also kind of makes one wonder of how many people in our country are actually focusing on these issues. There might be, and several of them who do, would they have the time to, in that particular year, to be able to write, etc., etc. In my view, the book is pretty easy to read, even when there's the technical information is abundant. And I'm a non-techie, and I try to read it from that perspective to see, do I get it? I did get most of it. And the gaps that I felt perhaps could also be covered in, and some of them were covered in the endnotes, and that's my reference to having the footnote. Several aspects are relevant. The most obvious example of readability is the chapter on fuel cycle, which has technical details, and it does require a bit of an effort to understand and think of links. acronyms, but there's a very long list of acronyms that are provided, and that's helpful too. Then the chapter on doctrinal development puts things in perspective. One significant takeaway from the discussion in that chapter is about the need for common strategic language. The terminologies as are acceptable from the Cold War jargon, as opposed to some which are considered differently within South Asia. Some aspects are related to the missile ranges or the NATO understanding of missile ranges. Others are like full spectrum, what does that mean to Pakistan, and how it is being seen by the rest of the world. And in fact, there is discussion in one of the chapters on that. So this issue of common strategic language, I think it comes out as a lesson in more than one chapter of this book. It also raises the need for the academia to draw Cold War lessons for nuclear weapons at the sea. There's been references to the sea legs in one way or the other in several chapters. And that basically brings out the responsibility of the academia, responsibility quote unquote, to prepare the next generation of what are the issues involved with this, and what were the issues involved with the Cold War at that time. There's been some discussion in the likelihood of the doctrinal evolution in the future. It tends to remind me of the Peter Fever's position on when states acquire nuclear weapons, they want to sustain that capability, hold it with that responsibility. When they have settled themselves with that, then there comes a consolidation phase, and that's where the evolution can come. And that's somewhat similar to what happened in Cold War, and that's the same lesson that you could draw in South Asia, although in a different way. The legal chapter is also, in my view, simple and easy to read, despite a lot of legal jargon. Some endnotes will require some review and a bit of typo error that needs to also be kept in view. But also, there's also, the book also points at the need to expand on some terminology. That's the strategic language issue that comes in again. And then on the nuclear command and control, it is a tricky subject to kind of work with. Lots of times one tends to write an internal note and tells oneself, this must never see the light of print. That's the kind of thinking that defines you. But this one claims the definition of the history, the non-nuclear command control structure. The outlook is which is useful. And one can see that the author has struggled to keep the operational details away, and still tried to remain meaningful and relevant when talking about nuclear command control. One important inference also somewhere in these debates tends to suggest that doctrinal developments can lead to an arms fleet or technological advancement. The connectivity with technological advancement is completely understandable, and the dilemma for any state that gets into these technologies will always remain to work on sufficiency, and hence the debate in more than one chapter on the credibility of the minimum deterrence. So that's the sense that one can take away from there. Also, something additionally could have been said on the communication management and security. That's just a passing reference. On safety and security, there is an elaborate discussion of these matters, and one takeaway that one can notice is that lots of times the concerns on safety and security arise almost all the time, if not all, most of the time, which are not the domain of the nuclear establishment, and hence the need for the national outlook and synergy with the national institutions. That's one big takeaway that I see from this. In the chapter on non-professional regime, there's a reference on page 147 on the Marxist Patriot. And my view on that is that Marx's comment is only partially correct. Ambassador Panswan hasn't actually referred to this particular aspect. So let me say a sentence or two on that. The AQ-Han affair, when it started to come out, and the sense that comes from Marx's remarks that when this happened, Pakistan took several steps in strategic export control and so on and so forth, is actually there's a disconnect, and that's why I call it partially correct. My personal experience is that when I looked at the Export Control Act draft, it was in its 4th revision, and it was in the year 2000, well before this issue of the 1540 and so on and so forth. So Pakistani outlook on having strategic export controls through a formally developed law. Of course, it took 4 years to actually have it promulgated as an act of parliament, but the work had already happened. I've mentioned a few times the chapter on IAEA, but it's a good read on the history, structure, and the functioning. It clearly brings out the mutually beneficial relationship that Pakistan has had with IAEA. But one also inevitably notes that no Pakistani has so far been in one of the senior positions at IAEA, for example, the Deputy Director Generals or such positions. It also refers to a little bit on the additional protocol, and this discussion is telling. One should note that there's a fleeting reference to the need for separation in the context of the additional protocol. And my view on this is that separation inherently exists to quite an extent. So there's some development on that. This chapter also very aptly refers to the connectivity of the Pakistani Center of Excellence on Nuclear Security with its other the spokes of the hub, shall we say, in the University at Pias, and the Safety Institute at the Nuclear Regulatory Authority called CISS, are also part of the Center of Excellence. But I should say that the chapter that intrigued me the most, and I must admit that I had to read it, several parts of it several times, was the chapter on posture. It's quite interesting, and it also has an interesting terminology of circular collaboration in the sense of how certain data comes out, and then it is referred by another one of the 3 or 4 prominent institutions or think tanks that are known for this, and then they use each other's data, actually using their own. So this goes in a circle, and that's how they continue to evolve it. And then it also brings out an important lesson on how to deal with the data, and that part is very significant for the students and the scholars alike to read carefully and take this work further of how to deal with data. It also deals with other aspects like explaining the terminology like full spectrum, etc., etc. My takeaway on discussions of this, one of the takeaways is the issue of the paradox of deterrence. The paradox of deterrence that says that in order that these weapons remain of deterrence and are never used, they must be usable, ready, survivable, and the other side must believe that they can get used. And for that, being ready is something that you have. So the issue of, and perhaps any other further work, follow-up work will take on the issue of believability versus the battlefield aspect of this. And this is a very, very interesting area that has come out of this. Um, then on quantifications, I think the challenge of the assessments is very aptly developed. It also brings out interesting things. Mr. Heather also referred to the Stinson and Norris study. If I remember this correctly, there was an NRDC study done by Bob Norris and perhaps a little before 2007, which was the first time that the sequence changed for a pattern of showing India having about 10 weapons less than Pakistan started from that. That was the first time it came out. There was a discussion. There was a counter-argument about that. And then it started to become a norm. And now you look at the pattern of the data. Everywhere you will see Pakistan being shown as plus 10 weapons. Whatever India has, Pakistan has 10 more. And this issue of the guesstimate has been discussed in this book. And that's my recommendation for anyone who is interested to read very closely. The conclusion actually sums up. It does also lean towards bringing out the need for some kind of risk reduction centers or some kind of a mechanism between India and Pakistan. But it also refers to the known and emerging challenges and new aspects that are coming out. In an overview, this book is as applicable for the students of strategic studies to see the basics and start reflecting on issues, as it is applicable to scholars who could think of how to take this debate forward. So my recommendation would be, and looking at the price of this book, which is, as I said, is very low price, is read the book. In fact, buy the book and read the book, buy two of them. If you do, you will perhaps start to see the aspect, some of the aspects that I'm telling you. But let me end by saying, in an overall sense, my takeaway is very readable book, and it belongs at personal library as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite the last reviewer, Dr. Rabia Akhtar, to present her review of the book. Dr. Akhtar is Head of Department, School of Integrated Social Sciences and Director, Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research at the University of Lahore. Ma'am, the floor is yours.